big corporate establishments. And we usually think of those as at war with each other, and how, you know, the big federal bureaucracy was there to protect us from the big bad mean corporate establishment. But due to the revolving door, due to interlocking corporate directories, due to regulatory capture, we have several mechanisms that have developed over the last 100 years that make it so that the big, powerful federal government under the executive branch, technically, but the bureaucracy becomes its own monolith. It's referred to contemptuously as the fourth branch of government. And then states are in the federal system, meaning federalism, which is what our Constitution set up. States are supposed to really have pretty much all the powers unto their own state, where the federal government was enumerated certain powers in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. So when I read again that every principle of our Constitution will be repudiated, that includes the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is the one that says all powers not specifically granted to the federal government in the Constitution are reserved to the states and to the people. And for example, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were aghast in the James Adams administration when the Alien and Sedition Acts were passed. These restricted freedom of speech. They were abhorrent to a free society. And Jefferson and Madison saw to it that Virginia and Kentucky both had resolutions by their states saying, we nullify that federal law because it is against the principles of freedom of speech. And the idea of state nullification, it might not ever be called that again because that was kind of settled in the first 100 years of our history. But it really has made a comeback in ways that aren't under that name. And so there is a de-evolution of power down to the states again in the last couple decades, really, even whilst we have this behemoth of a bureaucracy seeming to rule and run so much, from public health to you name it. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out in prophecy.
I'd just like to make one comment on that, too, that people may not know too much about. We get taught one way about how the states work. And I was talking to a state legislator from Arizona, and I was shocked at what they told me. They said when they go into session, the budget is already pretty much in place for them with everything they have to spend, because they said more than 50% of the budget of Arizona State is federal funds. So this isn't tax money that the Arizona government brought in. This is a federal fund that came from the federal government. And they said that all of that money, all of it comes with strings attached. And so there's legislation that they have to pass in order to get that money. And so basically what is happening is that we're starting to see a situation in the states where the states are they're total puppets of the federal government. And so there's less and less room for the individual states to chart their own path. And this is definitely not what our founding fathers had to say. No. And I'll point out one other thing while I've got the mic. Alexis de Tocqueville in 1830 is here in the United States looking over what's going on, and he's lamenting about the fact that Europe does not have the same kind of freedoms that America does. And one of the things he says about America, he says, there's no centralization. You have all these individual states and the individual counties. He's talking about county governments are responsive. You know, you look at county governments, they almost don't matter anymore.
Hold on. Yeah. In many respects, but you remember what happened during COVID? When governors were dropping edicts. I lived in a county where our sheriff said, not going to enforce that lockdown and stay-at-home order. Yeah.
But anyway, Alexis de Tocqueville sees that America's got these little sub-units of government all over the place, and he says, you guys have freedom. He says, in Europe, everything is moving towards more centralization of power. And he says, tyranny always centralizes power. And he sees that in the 1830s.
Yeah.
We're seeing a centralization of power everywhere, in all governments and in the church governments as well. We're living in very, very monumental times. Absolutely.
It's good to have a mission like this.
Amen.
Where you have that autonomy to do as the Lord leads in case state or church regulations were to say, we don't like that kind of message. The Lord is sustaining a work here with advantage.
Amen. And if they did come up against us, then we would say the work continues. Mm-hmm. The work must continue, regardless.
In the history of Christianity, I think, I'd have to sit down and do the math, but I feel like in most of the history of Christianity, you could either be killed or lose your job or imprisoned if you were to share the true gospel. And if you look, most of the time, the gospel actually is spread under those circumstances.
It's true.
We have such a small view of history because our lives are so short and we're living in a time of real freedom that we just take it for granted that that's the way the world's been. But the reality is that all of our forefathers and all the reason why we're here is that these were people that were willing to give their life just so that they could share the gospel.
Yeah.